Hey everyone, it's Gary here from Echidna Sewing, and today I'm going to have a chat about what constitutes a real sewing machine versus a toy sewing machine. So, very recently, and I don't normally like to date my videos, but I'm going to for this video because I think it's going to make it a little easier for me. It's December 2021, of course, and basically this month we noticed a little machine being advertised in one of the major department stores in Australia, and we got a few questions from customers about it. Questions about, is it really a sewing machine? Is it going to do what I want it to do? And I thought it'd be an interesting discussion to have and talk about some of the really, really inexpensive machines on the market that look pretty good, but are they going to meet your expectations? And the one I'm talking about right now, and I'm not going to mention retailers, you can go look for it if you like, but this is a little machine that was advertised online and in store, and it looked pretty good. In fact, if we have a look at the box, you'll see it says it's a multi-function sewing machine that does all this, and indeed it does. But how well does it do it? So let's have a look at the differences between this little machine, which as of December 2021 was selling in store for $45, which is really, really cheap for a sewing machine. Logic will often tell you that you can't produce a good sewing machine for $45, in fact, and that's very true. But just does it live up to the expectations and the claims it makes on the box? And let's compare it to a basic full-size sewing machine, the most basic machine we actually have. The first thing you're going to notice is there's a distinctive size difference. So you don't notice that until you actually compare the two. So this is the little $45 special, and this is, as of today in our showroom, December 2021, this machine is selling for $149 in our showroom. So there's about a $100 difference between the two prices, and this is the most basic machine we really sell in our store. But the size, it's very, very, very small. And again, you don't really notice it until you take it out of the box. The weight of the machine is also substantially different. This machine weighs just under 2 kilograms, so it's very light, and obviously the small size, lightweight. This machine weighs just under 5 kilograms, so it has a bit more weight to it, and it is a metal chassis machine, so there is a bit more weight in that. Other main differences on the machine before I actually stitch on them, they both have a single dial movement. Now on this sewing machine, it's quite a positive feel on the dial. You can tell it's engaging correctly. This one it's positive. It's a little bit harder to move as I move that around. And I should stress too, I'm not creating this video to, say bad things about anything, but I just think it's important before you go and spend any of your hard-earned money that you expect what you're buying is going to meet the expectations or the claims that are on the packaging. So they're both single dial machines. They both have a similar array of stitches. This probably has a few more options. There is no stitch length and width dials on either of the machines. So in a functionality sense, they're very similar. They both have a drop-in bobbin. Interestingly, this little one has no bobbin tension, so you can't adjust any tension on there, and it uses a magnet in the bobbin case to actually sort of hold the bobbin in place and apply a little bit of tension. This machine has a very traditional type of bobbin case, and you can adjust the tension on it if you wish. I won't get into a lot of the technical side of things, but I can tell you this machine has very little what we call thread check, or the check spring. In fact, I don't even think there's a check spring on there. I haven't pulled it apart yet, but I can't feel any thread check. And I don't need to explain what that does, except that pretty much every sewing machine ever made will have a check spring. And this one has a regular check spring, which helps create a much better stitch. They both have a little tension adjustment here and here, and that's fairly standard. You'd need a tension adjustment. This machine has a much more accommodating spool pin holder. This one has a very tiny spool pin at the back, and I'll just turn that around just quickly, and you'll see it doesn't really allow for any particularly big spools to go on there, so you've got to kind of use small spools. That's maybe not the end of the world, but this one can take a more regular type of spool. And of course, both machines, you could put a spool stand or a holder beside the machine to use a bigger spool. One of the big differences though, this is a 240 volt machine. It has oodles of more power than this guy, and you'll see that when I do my practical stitch demonstration. This particular machine can, believe it or not, run on batteries. So there's a battery holder, it takes four AA batteries, or you can plug into the power adapter that is supplied. That means this is a 6 volt machine, and it doesn't have much power. There's very little power indeed. This guy has a lot more power, as you'd expect with a more full-size sewing machine. This one has a free arm. It doesn't really make too much of a claim on that, but it does. It's not a practical free arm. You can hardly get anything in there at all. This one does have a free arm that just comes off, and it's more practical. You can get the leg of a pair of jeans or something around there should you decide to do that. Both use a standard sewing machine needle. I have to tell you, the needle that came in this machine was pretty ordinary. I've put a TNC chrome-plated jeans needle in this and this machine for the purpose of this demonstration, so they both have a great needle. I haven't changed the thread on this machine. It was what came out of the box, but I'm using what we would recommend. We always use for standard sewing as Resent on this machine, and that will show up when we're stitching. They both have a push-down reverse mechanism. This feels a little flimsy, and they both have a presser foot lift lever inside here. So you kind of can look at this and say, well, it's like a little miniature sewing machine. And it is. But it's when it sews, that's when you're going to really tell the difference. So let's have a closer look at a few stitches and see how it sounds, and you know, the pitfalls that each will have when they're sewing. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is I'm going to stitch a straight stitch on this machine, and we're going to pay particular attention to the noise. But before I do that, we'll talk about how you can control the machine. This machine has a convenient little low and high speed button here. And if I flick that, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. It's actually a little bit, it's a bit easy to push, so you could easily knock that, and that means the machine would start going. You also have a foot control of sorts that comes with the machine. And all this is a start-stop button, so there's no speed regulation with the foot control on this little guy. As opposed to the full-size machine, it has a regular foot control with full speed control, so it has, the harder you push, the faster the machine goes. But it does not have a start-stop button. And now we'll have a look at some stitching. So what I might do first is I'm just going to take a standard piece of calico, fold it over, and we're just going to listen to the machine stitching. Now, of course, when I accidentally tapped that button there, I made the machine run, and it took the thread out of the needle. Now, the threading on both machines is relatively easy. Believe it or not, it's easier on this one than the little guy, because once you pull your thread around through the tension and back up, you have to thread through a hole in the take-up lever, whereas this one has a slot. It just simply guides straight in there. You then have to also thread it through a hole on the needle bar. And the camera guy, hopefully he can get this as I'm doing it. So you actually have to thread the thread through here and then grab that, make sure it goes back into there. And then we're going to drag that needle to the up position. I'm going to grab my scissors here, cut the thread. There are no automatic needle threaders on both these machines. And I'm just going to pop that through there. Now, I couldn't imagine using a machine regularly without a needle threader, to be honest. My eyesight's not great, and somehow I've managed to fluke that even with that relatively thick, hairy thread that is on this machine. Okay, so we've threaded the machine. Pretty simple to thread. The bobbin, let's just lift this. We'll just take the bobbin out. There's no tension to thread. You just drop it in there, and you can just leave that sitting there. And what will happen is once we put this little cover back on, which you do have to push down fairly hard to get it in place, you will need to draw the bobbin thread. So you've got to turn that wheel, pull the bobbin thread up, and then both threads out the back of the foot, which is very traditional. That's the way sewing machines have always worked. So the machine is threaded, and I want to do just a standard straight stitch. So I'm going to go to stitch number 2, which is a standard straight stitch with a stitch length of probably about a couple of mils. I'm already on 2 there. I don't need to do anything else. So I'm not going to talk while this is stitching. I just want you to listen to it. But I will say this, as I put this foot down, there's virtually no pressure on that foot at all. There's hardly, I can lift that so easily. So it's going to struggle to feed certain fabrics, and particularly heavy fabrics. So we're ready to sew. Let's have a listen to it. Pretty noisy. No, there's no other way to explain that. It's pretty noisy. But it is, you know, it is what it is. It's a $45 sewing machine. Now, but without all that foot pressure, I'm going to put, and see, that's another little issue. That guy doesn't stay in very well at all. But without any foot pressure, if I turn this around, I'm just going to come back there, get that back into position. And I'm now going to apply just a really small amount of pressure on the fabric here, and we'll see how it feeds. I'm not doing much. I'm really not holding that much at all, but it's struggling. Reversing. Yeah, it works. We'll turn that off. Right, take the needle up. And we'll pull that out and we'll trim that off. Camera guy, actually I'm going to stitch this on some red fabric in a minute to show you the stitch. So I just wanted to go through the noise of it first. So let's listen. You can see different size, different weight, 240 volts, 6 volts, way more power on this. And as I said right at the start, this model is the most basic machine we sell for, you know, under $200. And we do have a regular foot control on the ground, which I'm going to use for this one. I'm going to go to a similar stitch length. About stitch number 8 will be roughly the same as stitch number 2 was on there, but let's listen. Much quieter, much more precise, and when we stitch on the red fabric, you'll see the difference in stitching. Let's have a bit of a reverse. The reverse reverses straight back on itself. That did not happen on here. It all went skew-iffed on reverse. And honestly, that's just the quality of the feed mechanisms. You can only get so much mechanism into a machine this size. So the reversing was quite good there. And let's do that other little sort of hold test. Now, I know you're actually relying on me doing this the same as I did on there, so I'm going to. I'm struggling. That took a lot more effort for me to hold that. It pulled it out of my hands as I want it to, but that's largely because there was so much more pressure on the foot control, on the presser foot, so it was always going to feed a lot better. So to take that out, we just raise the needle. Neither of these machines have any automatic needle positions or anything like that. They are super basic. We'll take that out, trim that off, and that's that. But here's where it all gets interesting. And this is why, if it were me buying a machine like this, the only application I see for this little machine, to be honest, is for a very young person who just wants to have a bit of fun with a sewing machine, sewing 2 layers of fabric together, no more, no less, and not having too many high expectations. If you're buying a machine on the basis that you want to do a bit of mending, you do want to you know, just sew a little bit, maybe not get too much into it, but try the experience, then please don't buy this machine. Or a machine like this. They're a toy. They really are. You're far better off going a little bit further and starting with even this most basic little machine here. And what I'm about to show you is probably the biggest reason. So I've got this is just a red napkin. It's just a polyester napkin. There's nothing special about it. I think, you know, cost me $2 at the $2 shop, funny enough. It's very light fabric. There's no thickness to it. So what I'm going to do first is run a row of stitches, and we'll be able to actually look at the stitch quality that you'd expect. Now, I mentioned before, this hasn't got what we call a check spring. The bobbin case has no tensioning device other than a magnet that sort of holds and tensions the bobbin up in itself. And I'm limited to the thread I can use easily on the machine, so I'm just using the thread that came with it, which I'll be honest is not nice thread. but you are going to be limited on thread selection on a machine like this. So we're just going to stitch 2 layers of fabric. We're going to go to I'll leave it on that same stitch, stitch number 2, and we're going to stitch down for a little, say 6 inches or so, and see what happens. I mean, it's feeding, it's stitching. We'll stop there, needle up, take up, lever up, grab my little snips. Where'd I put them? I mean, there is a little cutter on the side there, so we should use that actually. And we can just pull our thread up there and cut that off. Whoops, missed. So there's our stitching there. Camera guy, actually I'll stitch here, then I'll compare the two. And camera guy can do a close-up there. So let's go get this one under here. We'll run the same stitch, don't need to change it, for the same length. It's a lot faster too, of course, this machine. I didn't sew straight then, but I am not sitting in front of the machine, so you've got to give me a little bit of slack there. And this also has a cutter on the side, which I could use. I can't even see it at the moment because I am not sitting there. There we go. Okay, so let me trim off these little threads so it's not too confusing for you. But you know, if you're going to sew, you want to at least have a good quality stitch. Before I turn that over, because that's where it looks pretty ugly, to be honest. Get rid of that. Okay, camera guy, so there's our 2 rows of stitching. We're zoomed in, I hope. I hope that position's all right. He's nodding, saying yes. So the stitch on the right is off the little toy machine. The stitch on the left is off the bigger machine. The tops look pretty similar, but have a look at the bottom. So now the stitch on the left is off the toy machine, and the stitch on the right, once we've reversed it, is off this. And you'll see there's chalk and cheese there. This is not setting a great stitch because you have very little control over the tension. You have no control, to be honest. I could tighten this up a bit more, but that will just not make too much difference because the bobbin has no tension. And you know, like if you're a child and you're 4 or 5 or 6-year-old and you're just making a simple, you know, little doll's dress or something, and it's a couple of pieces of fabric being stitched together, you're not going to really care. So it doesn't matter. But if your expectation is to get, you know, you want to mend something or you want to at least have a nice looking stitch, this is not the machine to get. Spend a bit more, get at least a starting point like this. So stitch quality varies there, obviously. But here's the big one. I'll simulate it. In fact, here, I've got an old pair of denim or canvas type jeans here. And one of the common repairs and alterations we do in any home is you might get a pair of jeans or a pair of slacks and you want to take a hem up. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to show you what happens on here, but it's just not going to do it. So, but I would be able to do it on this machine. But it's over those heavy side seams that you've just got no hope of getting through on a machine like this. But even less than that, that's really thick. Let me simulate something that's even easier to sew. So this is just a plain cotton fabric. It's very, very simple. I'm going to simulate a seam stitch or a heavy seam on this. So let's do something like this. I'm going to fold that over and I'm going to make a little crazy seam there. I might even sew it down on here to start with. I'm just going to sew down, in fact, I might sew down this side using a straight stitch again, just to give me something to work with here. So I'm going to go to my medium speed, turn that off. So I've stitched down there. And again, you can hear the sound. So this time, to compare the noise and the ease of it, I'm going to go across to this one and we're going to stitch down just there and use my foot control. Great, take that up, take up, lever up, and cut away all this. So this is a very quick and not so professional simulation. But so now we've actually got 4 layers of that fabric. And what I want to do is fold that over now. I might fold it over this way. And so now we have 8 layers of fabric. It's pretty simple fabric to sew though. Now this is not necessarily a seam, but it's in order to give you an idea of what is still relatively easy to sew. Let's sew across this one using this machine first. Get our thread back through there. And you'll see that if we come through here, it'll feed that over. No real drama. I didn't have to pull that through or push it. Nothing at all. I'd expect that on a full-size sewing machine. Trim that off. Again, don't worry about my poor sewing. It's more about getting you to experience this. So I'm going to try and do the same thing here. No more changes. I want to sew up over that. Whoops, wrong. Push the foot control for the wrong machine then. Let's now see how we go. It's really working. Oh, it's scary. We got there. Got over it. So that's 8 layers. Just achieved it. But it did stitch over it, which was good. Now, if we had to mend something a little bit thicker than that, and camera guy, you're going to need to zoom right in here because this is the fundamental difference on the two machines. The biggest difference, in fact. I'm going to go to a much thicker piece. I've added another 2 layers of fabric there. And if you had to mend, and this is still thinner than the jeans I had, those canvas jeans, but I'm just going to try. Now, camera guy, we need to be focused right in near the needle bar, and I'm going to turn this around a bit. And I'm going to turn it by hand. Now, I don't know if you can see that, but as I try to force that needle through the work, the whole needle is bending. The needle is bending to the left. The whole needle bar, in fact, there you go. It's bending to the left, and that's still not getting to some of the thicknesses that we may want to do. And what will happen is that will break the needle will hit the needle plate, and it's not going to stitch. I don't want to stitch it because it will break if I stitch on it. Let's compare it to a bigger machine. And so what happens there is that whole needle bar bends. When we put it under this bigger machine, turn it by hand, the needle goes straight through. Because this has a more fixed or a rigid needle bar frame that won't allow the whole needle bar to move. And that's, look, it's not that I'm bagging this machine, it's just a toy machine. They can't build a rigid fixed needle bar for $45. You can't do it. So when you buy this machine, if you know what to expect, then there's probably no surprises. But don't expect it to sew anything heavy. And just to give you an idea of, I might even grab this, I'll pop this under just to show you. Camera guy hopefully will get us here. Now one of the fundamental difficulties here is to get a pair of jeans under here. I almost don't have enough foot height. So I've got that sitting there. There's no way it would stitch up on there, but this will really show you what happens to that needle bar. Are we zoomed in here, camera guy? Nice and close. Watch. Look. It just can't do it. It's not that the needle can't go through the thickness, it's just that there's so flimsy, the actual needle bar mechanism, that any resistance to the needle is translated into movement in the needle bar. So the whole needle bar moves out of position, the needle bends and you will break it. It's the absolute certainty you will break the needle if I tried to stitch that any further. And that's with a really good quality needle. By comparison, let's have a look at this basic entry-level machine. Take this out. Oh, and let's just have a listen to that. So it does sew that quite easily. No dramas at all. Oops, well, these scissors will do. So let's pop this under and see what the needle bar does on this one. Exactly the same simulation, same position. Camera guy, we focus down here now. So needle goes through, no issues at all. I can feel it trying to work through there, but the needle doesn't bend. And in fact, I'd be fairly confident if I just continued on there, I can get off over that. And we're done. So fundamentally, the difference between the two machines is they're very, very, very lightly built, and that's why they're $45. They got a very low power motor, a 6-volt motor. They just don't really have any power at all. The feeding mechanism doesn't feed terribly well because you have very little foot pressure anyway. There's no tensioning really on the bobbin other than the magnet that stops the bobbin from, or helps sort of the bobbin resisting the spin of the bobbin. They're very small, there's not much you can do on it. And they're $45 and they're a toy. That's my appraisal of that little machine. Everything they say on the box is true. It does everything it does. So it's not that there's no false advertising or anything. I'm certainly not claiming that. But I am saying it's a very, very underperforming multifunction sewing machine, and you get $45 worth. That's it. These guys, on the other hand, actually pretty good value, under $200, and you know, our price currently is even better. But as is always my way for anyone who says to me, okay, well, great, I'm not going to buy a toy machine, and you're not even wrapping this machine, which I'm not, as it's good for the money, but if it were me starting out or looking for a good sewing machine, or getting a child or someone new to really enjoy the experience, I would most definitely start at an entry-level computer machine. And of course, the machine we thoroughly recommend is that little guy there, the NV50S. We've got loads of videos on that, so you can watch that on our website. There's heaps of good information there. But at the very least, an entry-level computer machine is the best starting point. They're more reliable, they're easier to use, and you'll just have a good experience with them. And that's important, because you want, if you're entering this market, learning how to sew, or you're getting someone to try it, make sure you have a good experience. It's a great skill to have. It sets you up for a lifetime of practical skills that will not only save you money, it lets you be a little bit creative, and just, you know, have a good time with a craft that is a lot of fun. So that's it. Hope you found that little bit of information helpful. And again, just reiterating, it was not about bagging this machine for $45. It's kind of cool, but it's a toy, and that's where it really sits. So cheers for now.